Welcome to Climbing Together, the Small Business Experience. I'm Beth Houtrow, the founder of Climb the Small Business Book Club, and our episode today is brought to us by the Renaissance Entrepreneurship Center of the San Francisco Bay Area. Every episode, I talk to a small business owner about a mistake that they've made and what they learned from the experience. Mistakes are inevitable, perfection's impossible. So let's embrace the mistake. And today we're so excited to be welcoming Alissa Redmond to the podcast. Alissa, tell us a little bit more about you and your business.
Hi, thanks, Beth. I went to Duke with you, and we both got our master's degrees in public policy. Soon after that, I worked for the city of New Orleans for a year or so, and then I worked for the State Department for most of the time since I've seen you last. And so about 3 years ago, I was evacuated from Bolivia. My last overseas assignment with the department, there was some political instability because of a presidential election. And at that time, I had a 4-year-old, and I'd served in India and Afghanistan and wasn't super worried about my safety. But as soon as my daughter's was impacted, I knew that I needed a different gig. And so I took leave without pay for a couple of years from the department and decided to move back to North Carolina, and wasn't originally thinking about owning a small business because I had no background in retail. I had worked as like a ticket taker in the movie theater once, and that was like all that I had for retail. But I was looking in the Charlotte area to buy a house, and I couldn't find anything that I liked. And I had this like random train of thought, and I was like, well, I'm bringing the nanny, so I should probably work to pay the nanny because God forbid I take care of my own child. I need a break. And then I started thinking like, oh, maybe I'll work part-time in a Barnes and Noble. And that made me think, oh, I wonder if there's a bookstore for sale near Charlotte. And so I Googled from my desk in La Paz, Bolivia, I Googled bookstores for sale near Charlotte, North Carolina. And I found one, and it's the most beautiful bookstore that ever existed. And so I started working with a business. They're like these brokers that sometimes sell, just kind of like a commercial real estate agent or a residential real estate agent, but just a broker for a business. And so I reached out to that company that the previous owner was selling the business through, and very quickly came to some decent terms that seemed like they'd work out. So I flew to Charlotte from the coup, and it wasn't a coup, but it felt like a coup, and bought a Volvo and drove to Salisbury, which is about an hour away from Charlotte, and took one step inside this bookstore and decided that that was what I was going to do and I would figure it out. And I told everybody that I was leaving the department to run a bookstore in rural North Carolina, and they all thought I had lost my damn mind. So,
and the name of your bookstore?
South Main Book Company in Salisbury, North Carolina.
Awesome. Well, that is the most epic small business. That's why I started story that I have heard.
Good. It's pretty good.
So thank you for sharing that with us. All right, but let's get into it. Talk to me about a mistake that you made when you were launching your business. Like, what was just something that didn't go quite right, or like a misconception you had?
Yeah. So I would say that the mistake that I made was that I didn't really trust my gut as much as I felt I should. And it was fine. But again, I was telling people that I was leaving the federal government to run a bookstore. And I remember one family member was like, but there's Amazon. And another family member just thought I had lost my mind and really was concerned about the safety of my child. And I ran some very preliminary numbers, and I worked with a couple of current bookstore owners who kind of train new bookstore owners, and just kind of ran some numbers by them. And we kind of all figured out like, yeah, this could maybe work. And it was lucky that I didn't trust myself too much. And so I took the leave without pay, and I had the option of going back to the government if it didn't work out. And I would have just lost a chunk of my savings, but it wasn't all of my savings. But I just had this feeling in the pit of my stomach that I could do it. And not only could I do it, but I could do it really well. And I couldn't put that down at a business plan and have that make any sense. And I couldn't really articulate it to anyone because I had no business being a business owner. I had no background in it. And I just tried to give myself as much grace as I could and a lot of leeway. And I basically just wrote off huge sums of money and said, you may never see that again. And it was a lot of money. But I just kind of felt like I was investing in myself more than like, I kind of had that feeling a little bit when I went to Duke, because of taking out the massive loans that were required to get my graduate degree. And here I was not using that degree really at all, and doing something very costly. But I felt like if it works, then this could be the next 5 years of my life. It could be the next 10 years of my life. It could be the rest of my life. And I'll get to decide that. And how exciting is that? And how exciting is it to never have to have a boss ever again? Yeah. And after, a dozen years or so with some good bosses and some just horrific creatures, that was really appealing. And so I gave myself a lot of grace, and I gave myself a good period of time to test the waters. And when I ran the numbers, it all started to make sense. And I didn't have the foresight. I mean, no one knew. Like 3 months after I bought the store, COVID hit. And if I had bought in a different location geographically, I could have been sunk. But North Carolina, with its very lax health standards, I never had to close my doors. And I felt safe doing what I was doing. There were never more than 3 people in the store. We all masked up. And I had some really interesting conversations with those who chose not to. But that's another great thing, too. I mean, I kind of get by de facto, like, the cream of the crop of customers because I'm selling books. And it's given me a very interesting introduction into a town that perhaps otherwise would not have accepted me with such open arms. But because I was coming to save the bookstore, that just instantly gave me all of this credibility that I've really been able to use to build a very strong community around myself and the store and my kids. And it's worked out to be a very lovely life. So
good. It's so good that you let your gut overpower your brain, right? Your brain is like, I don't know if I can do this. And your gut's like, yeah, I got it.
Yeah. And I was looking at like my credit card statements from prior to owning the store. And that was a large part of what kind of led me to buying the bookstore. It was like, all I spend money on is books.
Might as well just have a store.
And I love like the buying for a bookstore is really the piece of it that I love, because I love thinking of who shops in my store and what they might want to get. And like right now with the season and Christmas coming up, and like really, that's when you're really buying a lot of stuff, just chance and happenstance. And maybe somebody will take it and maybe somebody won't. And I love it. I love kind of rolling the dice and seeing who's going to go after that, like, illustrated Kama Sutra.
In Salisbury, North Carolina.
Fun. Cheers to you.
Well, that's amazing. All right. So at Climb the Small Business Book Club, our 2 mantras are about continual learning and community. So for continual learning. Obviously, you're a reader. So tell me about a book that has been inspirational or motivational for you in your business or in your life.
Yeah. So there's a couple of, I don't read a ton of business books. I never have. I've definitely read, some Adam Grant and whatever, but the books that have really spoken to me have been like, that have spoken to me as an entrepreneur even, and as a community member, have been more of the like extreme sport or like extreme personality books. And so anything by John Krakauer, I've devoured and I've sold dozens of in my store. And I remember reading When Men Win Glory right before I went to Afghanistan. And so that's one of my favorites. And it's about Pat Tillman and how he made a 180 life change that ended up being kind of a 360. Leaving the NFL, joining the military, going to serve in a war zone, and then being a casualty of the war through friendly fire. And then another book that really speaks to me is Mountains Beyond Mountains by Tracy Kidder. And I'm reading his new book right now, Rough Sleepers. But both books are about people in the medical fields. So Paul Farmer for Mountains Beyond Mountains. And he came to Duke while we were there. And he just recently passed away. But people who could have gone into a very lucrative career, but instead chose to serve people who would not otherwise maybe have had access to quality medical care. And so those are the books that really speak to me on a personal level about how I want to run not necessarily my business, but my life, and how I have run my business. And there's a bottom line that I need to meet to be able to provide salmon for my children every night. But aside from that, I've never had grand intentions of being a millionaire. Although I'm doing very well for myself. And I find that the more I contribute to my community and the more that I look at building a community as an investment for not just my store, but for myself, but the more that I contribute and, donate a float to an event or books to another event, the more that I give to the events that matter in my community, the more that I get back. So, and that's not just the satisfying personal, but it's also people coming in and buying books too. Well, and it's all good. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. And then the last question is have you built a community of small business owners around you, and how has that impacted you as a new small business owner?
Yeah, I really tried hard in the beginning to build that. And I definitely have a very strong network of other bookstore owners all across the country. That's the other cool thing. There's so many cool things about owning a bookstore. But I went to a book owner convention right after I bought the bookstore, and there were all these authors there, and I was like, oh, Rebecca Solnit. And but then there were also the owners of the really big bookstores too, like City Lights and different Politics and Prose and all the really great bookstores. And I got to just pick their brains and talk to them about, and they were so giving and so open. And I'm in a couple of Facebook groups for bookstore owners. And I mean, we trade tips on, what books are selling. And if somebody really needs a copy of a book and they don't have it in the store, we put out a blast and send it to each other. And there's a real community there. But I also tried to build a really strong community within the downtown business owners that I work with. That has been more frustrating to me for a number of reasons, mainly as I become more politically vocal. Mm-hmm. And I live in a somewhat liberal town, but in a very liberal community, a very liberal county, a very gerrymandered county. Mm-hmm. And as I have progressed in my anti-racism tactics, like we had a Confederate monument right around the corner from the store, and now I'm kind of like fighting the Civil War all over again because there's these Confederate war reenactors that march through the county's 4th of July parade. Like, of all the parade, the 4th of, like, they tried to secede. Yeah. I just don't get it. And so I have been very vocal about these things. And some people, I think, would rather that I just choked on a chicken bone.
Even though it's a liberal community, they still don't want to get mixed up in that.
Well, and small business owners are typically Republican and very concerned about, you know, the economy more so than perhaps social welfare. Like, and as a very general standard, like statement that is not by any means accurate, you know, writ large, but as a blanket statement, it's true. And so there are a lot of people that used to speak to me that maybe don't speak to me quite as much. And so, yeah, but I have just kind of, at this point, now I'm 3 years in. You know, the first year I was all about trying to be friends with everybody and not making waves and whatever. But now I feel like I fully trust my gut. And I sometimes do things that literally are insane. And I feel that I know myself now enough to know, you know, I am a trained diplomat, and I moved back to the United States in part because I didn't recognize America anymore. And so I am going to fight like hell to try to bring some of the values that I was trying to push out on the international community at home. That is kind of my mission statement right now. And so awesome. We'll see how that goes.
And you found your people with the library community. And so unfortunate that, and I know I've seen your Instagram page that the work that you're doing, it might not speak to all the other small business owners, but it's clearly speaking to plenty of people in Salisbury who support you.
Yeah. And, you know, people can shop our store from anywhere online. That's one of the great things that's happened for the book selling community at large in the last couple of years. There's now a bookshop, which I tried to educate you about, which is a way to support independent bookstores, even if you're not near one, because there are so many communities that don't have them anymore. And so they feel like they have to resort to Amazon, and you don't have to do that. You can use bookshop.org. And people have found me through TikTok and Instagram from all over the country and really all over the world. And they're buying books from me to show their support, even though they're not close physically. So.
Yeah. Well, I always tell people, right? You have to have a voice and be authentically you. If you try to please everybody, no one's interested.
That's very true.
You are, then the people who are like you are going to be passionate about supporting you. So.
Yeah. And every time I've been vocal about something controversial, it's brought more of the people that I want in my life into my store.
Yeah.
Which is great. And it deters the few readers that aren't with me. And I'm okay with that too.
You're okay with that. Well, okay. Alissa, that's the podcast. Thanks so much for joining, and thanks for bringing your glass of wine. It's been a delight. Thanks so much.
Anytime, Beth.
This podcast is brought to you by Climb the Small Business Book Club, where entrepreneurs go to learn, discuss, apply, and grow. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe at Apple, Spotify, or Google Podcasts, or follow us on Instagram at Climb Book Club. And always remember, mistakes are inevitable, perfection's impossible. So let's embrace the mistake.